I want to tie up a few loose ends from session one. One of the questions was about examples of the psychologized self, and I sort of struggled on the spot to come up with some of those, so I tried to think about that last night when I wasn't sleeping in the tent. And really, any movie or story or book that has a journey of self-discovery, that's really the psychologized self. So honestly, that's most kids' movies. Okay. Anytime there's a character who's like journeying to discover themselves, and then many times over against their parents, who are the bad guys, right? Anytime you have a story that is on that character journey of internal discovery, that's really the psychologized self. I think also in the way we talk about work today, a lot of times, I encountered this when I quit my teaching job. Many people were, and right, I understand what they were saying, but they were like, well, you got to do what makes you happy, right? You got to do what fulfills you. You got to follow your passion. Well, I didn't quit teaching because I was trying to follow a new passion. It's more so that the scenario required me to do so. You know what I mean? If I were to have told my grandfather, who worked in an Anchor glass factory in upstate New York for like 40 years, if I were to tell him, I'm so glad you're getting a sense of fulfillment from your job, he probably would have looked at me like, what are you talking about? You know, it was more that it was a way to provide, right? And yes, there's meaning in making things, and work is a part of what it means to be human. There was work before the fall, right? But we've made it into a sense of identity almost, as a way to sort of express yourself or fulfill your passion. So I think those are a couple other examples of how we see that today. Just a couple other things on the handout. We didn't really talk about some of these things here, so I just want to point those out to you for further reference. Some graphic organizers from the session one handouts to try to help visualize what we talked about. The top one here, God's truth being the truth, to my truth, your truth, to my truth or else. Right? That's really the progression we documented in our session yesterday. Right? The idea of objective truth outside of the self, something that's revealed to us. Then this idea of a relativistic understanding of my truth versus your truth, to the point we are today where my truth or else, right? Then also one there that documents Carl Trueman's trajectory of the self. One about dualism that we sort of skipped yesterday with the last section there, trying to get through all that. Nancy Pearcey has some excellent books on the human person and on human sexuality, and she talks a lot about this idea of what she calls the split between the person and the body. And this chart I've compiled to help understand what she talks about, that many of the modern issues we face today, abortion, euthanasia, homosexuality, transgenderism, and so forth, all of those topics really are an example of the split, where we're splitting the person from the body, an internal sense of self versus the actual human body that we have. And then there's a little bit more about critical theory to help visualize that. And then on the back, or on the last page, I've tried to compile some resources about different topics. Each section has some books that are theological in nature, and then some books that are basically secular in nature. And I think it's important to engage with both and understand the arguments that are being made in the public square by secular people that we can resonate with in some ways. Obviously, there's going to be some core differences, right? We're not going to be all in with the TERFs that we talked about yesterday. But on some points, they have a point that they're making. And also a point that might not be what's the right word? That might be an easier inroad with non-Christians, to use a non-Christian source to make the same points that we as Christians would then go further with, right? Does that make sense? Okay? So there's a place for those. So some great books on human embodiment on the left-hand side from a theological perspective. I'll just point out the Lutheran one there. John Kleinig's Wonderfully Made, a great recent book on the topic. And then on the secular side, there's many recent books that are challenging the sexual revolution, challenging transgenderism, and so forth. Again, from a non-Christian perspective, which is another argument to add to the arguments we have. And then also I've got some shorter articles that I've written on these topics that I have there as well. If you're not ready to tackle a whole huge book on these topics, those are some shorter articles that deal with the topics as well. And then same thing for the rest. If you want to talk about any of the specific resources or recommendations from there, because I know it's still a big list, I'd be happy to talk about that with you later. Okay, so yesterday really was sort of an overview of the problems we're facing to try to help you give you some additional tools in your toolkit, how to understand the issues, maybe how to talk about them more clearly or more clearly perceive them in society. And also, I want you to think about this not as preaching to the choir, right? In a sense, we all agree probably with what I'm saying, or at least most of it, right? But more choir practice, okay? I think sessions like this are choir practice. They help us understand the issues and practice what it's like to engage with the issues. Does that make sense? Okay? So that we can indeed help each other, support each other, and have each other's back. So now today we're going to explore ways to strengthen the bonds of family, education, church and life, doctrine, and practice. And as I mentioned yesterday, I don't offer these as the answer or the solution to everything, but explorations to help us see the issues and ask the right questions, so that we hopefully can have something valuable from these sessions, some puzzle piece that maybe finally fits together, some additional courage to make hard decisions, some practical applications for our homes, for our churches, for our confessional group. And that really is the whole point of these sessions, right? The point of these sessions isn't to bash bad ideas so we can pat ourselves on the back for our good ideas. The intent of these sessions is to envision alternative ways of living, time-tested alternatives, and try to think about forming habits to make those more of a reality, right? Are we just complaining contrarians that point the finger in society, or do we have something to offer, right? An intriguing alternative view of life. Do we just sort of stand athwart history, as a famous conservative once said, and yell, "Stop"? Or do we have something to offer? Here's an alternative that's true and beautiful. Come and join us. If we don't, it easily comes across that we're just a bunch of grumpy folks yelling, "Get off my lawn!" Right? We have more than that. So this means reflecting on how our lives are structured. What provides the rhythms and routines for our lives? Is it the work calendar, the school calendar, the vacation schedule? How do society's values impact how we organize our lives? And where is the balance of human formation taking place? Under whose watch? And with what devices? These questions hit close to home, literally, by requiring us to re-examine our life choices, long-term habits, and daily decisions. And the structures of our society today, from education, the workplace, and our schedules, have shaped, framed, and influenced how we've made those decisions in more ways than we know. The way we organize our lives today is, historically speaking, pretty new. The way we've divided life between work and home, school and home, with schedules that are constantly sending us in different directions. These are innovations that might actually work against forming stable, humanely scaled lives around Christ and His gifts. So that's what we're going to explore in this session. How education, economics, career, and family, how maybe we can rethink those a little bit by getting more of a perspective on the past and the present. So we're going to start with education. American schooling today has ballooned to consume a massive portion of many kids' lives. At the dawn of the 20th century, the average American school year was roughly 2 months shorter than it is today, and the average student was absent about a third of the time. Only 11% of upper teens attended high school, and even fewer graduated, while American adults averaged about 8 years of schooling. At the dawn of the 21st century, not only has mandatory schooling expanded to K-12 and 180 days a year, it now includes Head Start pre-K programs, and the push for everyone to go to college makes it seem more like a pre-K through grade 16 system. The more time schooling consumes, however, the more the outcomes that really matter seem to falter. As a former public high school teacher, it seems to me that what happens at the typical school on the typical day is not really education, but schooling. And there's a big difference. The process of schooling is more about compliance and socialization and training than about actual education and human formation towards truth, goodness, and beauty. In his prophetic 1971 book, Deschooling Society, Ivan Illich argues that modern schooling causes students to confuse process with substance, by which the pupil is thereby schooled to confuse teaching with learning, grade advancement with education, a diploma with competence, and fluency with the ability to say something new. Schooling in large part has become a gameable system. The legendary New York City public school teacher John Taylor Gatto, and winner of multiple Teacher of the Year awards, came to see the game of school too. He concluded after all those years and all those awards that he was inadvertently teaching counterproductive lessons, which he called the hidden curriculum. He didn't actually teach English, as his certification stated. He really taught school. On the occasion of winning the New York State Teacher of the Year Award in 1991, he shocked his audience by outlining the 7 lessons that schooling actually teaches students. Confusion, class position, indifference, emotional dependency, intellectual dependency, conditional self-esteem, and surveillance. This is the national curriculum, according to Gatto, that produces, quote, physical, moral, and intellectual paralysis, and no curriculum of content will be sufficient to reverse its hideous effects. Can you imagine that? Winning the State Teacher of the Year Award and getting up there and basically saying, these are the things I teach. That's pretty powerful. Yet despite Gatto's insights and despite the results of public schooling, it continues for many people to be assumed as the normal way and the way that it's always been done. Gatto explains, quote, "It is the great triumph of compulsory government monopoly mass schooling that only a small number of people can imagine a different way to do things." To Gatto's 7 lessons, I suggest a few more. Perhaps most pervasive is the additional lesson of technological dependency. This comes through plainly as digital devices figure so prominently in classrooms from kindergarten through 12th grade. Many teachers today don't even know how to teach a lesson without the internet or without a smartphone. One-to-one device initiatives in districts nationwide further reinforce this lesson by providing students with Google Chromebooks throughout their school career. Might there be any mixed motives for companies like Google in gaining access to future customers and their data at such an early age? No. It's just out of the goodness of their hearts, right? Technological dependency is a horrible lesson to teach students, as it normalizes the mediation of reality through technology and leads students away from direct encounters with each other and the world. Then comes the lesson that grades can be gamed. A 2020 Fordham Institute study scathingly explored this issue of grading and grade inflation and concluded that grading is more about compliance and playing the game of school than about content mastery. Many teachers set up their courses so students can pass just by completing most assignments. I did. Opportunities for extra credit abound as further ways to pad students' grades and to get them through. And this all is driven by the focus on school ratings, having positive school ratings, having high graduation rates. That nudges teachers along into the pass students along mindset, and students get the message loud and clear. A third lesson is cheaters do prosper. School is further gamed as academic integrity declines. Cheating levels have been rising for years now, especially among high-achieving students where competition is intense. And with more schooling done digitally, new forms of cheating emerge. In the last several years, researchers have correlated spikes in internet searches for educational topics to the times of nationwide exams. What does this do to students? What do students internalize about what it means to be a virtuous person within such a gameable system? Gatto concludes, schools teach exactly what they are intended to teach. and they do it well. How to remain in your place in the pyramid. From their origins, public schools have in large part also functioned as engines of assimilation. From the beginning, Peter Salen writes in Assimilation American Style, quote, "The major project of public schools in the United States was assimilation rather than learning." Schooling, John Dewey argued, is the most economical and efficient means of social advance and reorganization. And in the 20th century, his vision came to fruition as schools became the primary tool to deal with just about everything: social problems, inequality, immigrant assimilation, overcoming outdated ideas, preparing workers for the industrial world. Whatever it was, schools were seen as the solution. And so began the professionalization of schooling as a domain of experts who know what is best for your children, with ever-growing credentialing bureaucracies that insert themselves between parents and children. The goal of this educational project was not the passing down of inherited wisdom. Instead, education was primarily about social efficiency, experience, and self-expression, in the service of adapting to the new world of the 20th century, with industrialization, urbanization, and immigration all around. In such an environment of rapid change, schooling became the main force to assimilate students into the broader culture. Schools were engines of industrial training for the factory, and engines of assimilation for the waves of immigrants that came to our shores. You put inquisitive children in the school and mold them into passive, compliant workers. You put immigrant children in the school, and you pop out dutiful Americans. Jewish playwright Israel Zangwill epitomized the era in his play The Melting Pot, from which comes the metalworking analogy of America as the great melting pot, where different metals are combined together to form an alloy that's stronger than the originals. And in the crucible of the American experience, we are forged together from disparate groups to create a unified country. Right? That's the melting pot analogy. And certainly schools did a good job with that during the 1900s. They did form some semblance of unity. They told some story of what it meant to be an American. Now, it didn't apply to everyone, or all times and places. Racism was still prominent, nativism was still prominent, a whole series of groups that didn't quite fit in the story. But for the most part, it held the nation together. It also helped to have external enemies. World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. However, there were always segments of the population that resisted Americanization and were skeptical about how schooling would assimilate their children. Groups with distinct cultural or religious heritage were concerned that assimilation into Americanism and generic religion would overshadow their own faith and culture. And they had a point. They perceived that what was on offer in America's civil religion and its main organ of dissemination, the public school, certainly wasn't Orthodox Judaism, traditional Catholicism, or confessional Lutheranism. It wasn't even Trinitarian theism. It was God-ism. And this God-ism grew in prominence especially during the Cold War, with the enemy of the Soviet Union, with its atheism. The irony is that as civil religion became more pronounced in public life, with things like adding God to the pledge, or making all UN's currency required to have "In God We Trust," that all happened in the 50s, right, during the Cold War. As that was happening, as civil religion became more prominent, it was also becoming more vacuous as to the content. Accenting God more prominently in civic life wasn't really done because of any deep Christian commitment or fidelity to historic orthodoxy. President Eisenhower even said so, the president that was president when those things were added to the pledge and the currency. He said this, quote, "Our form of government has no sense unless it is founded on a deeply felt religious faith." And here's the kicker. He said this, "And I don't care what it is." In other words, I don't care what you believe in as long as you believe in something. Faith in faith. Faith as simply a deep feeling about something. That's certainly not Christianity. That's religion as pragmatism. If anything, throwing in more God in schools and in civic life in some ways lulled people to sleep. giving them a false sense of security and confidence that we were Christian, as they filled the content of that God with whatever they felt like believing. During this era, Lutherans were alongside Jews, Catholics, and Amish in the legal battles to maintain the right to educate their own children. In other words, even when prayer was in schools and Bible reading was in schools, Lutherans still were opposed to public schooling. Their basic argument was that neutral education is impossible. You're always being formed, directed towards something. And they wanted that formation to occur in the context of actual Christian education, in their local churches and families, whatever exact form that takes. As schools functioned as engines of assimilation and preparation for the industrial world, they also, in conjunction with urbanization and industrialization, became engines of family fragmentation. Industrialization first atomized the family into individual workers. Now schools cemented that separation further, as children were required to be at school for larger portions of each day and year, away from their parents, and certainly away from the world of work, whether in the factory or the home. As industrial life continued to advance and the mindset of mass schooling penetrated deeper into society and in the modern psyche in the 20th century, the possibilities of family-centered arrangements were obliterated. Models where much of a family's economic and educational productivity were generated in the home, with all members contributing, lost viability, as society increasingly encouraged people to choose individual careers, to move to new cities, and chart their own paths. Schooling played a significant role in normalizing this autonomous, isolated living through the daily practice of separation from family and through schooling's strong messages of self-fulfillment and careerism. Technological changes also were central in family fragmentation. As modes of transportation went from horses to railways to cars, it became more likely and feasible for families to scatter. The relationship between home and work also changed as industrialization unfolded. The older model of family production on your property was gradually replaced with going to work at the factory and eventually the office. Instead of mother, father, and children all contributing something in the home economy, in the industrial world, work became the domain of adults, especially male adults. The stark isolation of home from work increased the isolation of children from parents and mother from father. Schooling, an industrialized economy, and consumerism all have played a role in enthroning the autonomous individual, as we see today. So I'd like to pause there after the first part for any questions or clarifications. So that was part one, sort of an overview of history of education and family fragmentation in relation to both education and industrialization. John?
What's one I spell Gatto?
Gatto. Dumbing Us Down is one of his best books, and I've got it on the list there. Yep.
And how about the 7 things it teaches? Could you run me
Sure.
confusion down to surveillance?
Sure. Just let me find where it is here. 1 second.
I don't write fast. I got a school board meeting to go on. First question for school board now.
Okay. Yeah. Where we at? Okay. Confusion, class position, indifference, emotional dependency, intellectual dependency, conditional self-esteem, and surveillance.
Thank you.
I assume it was the last Teacher of the Year awardee one.
He's got other things to do. He went on to write a bunch of books that have been pretty good. But yes, Fran.
Josh, today, parents having a say-so as to what goes on in the schools, what their children should, if the parents don't have a foundation, a Christian foundation, how can they really decide what should be taught to their children in schools? You've got to start with the parents, a foundation. They have to have some kind of a religious, good foundation.
Yeah, the family unit is so central, right? And the primary teacher is really being the parents. No matter what educational option families choose, the parents are ultimately responsible for the education of their children. Even if we get assistance with that, right, through some form of schooling, still we are ultimately responsible. Yeah. Any other questions or clarifications on part one there? Yes, Alec?
Sorry, in the very beginning, what was the percentage of kids graduating from high school that you mentioned?
Okay, in the early 1900s,
Yeah.
we have 11%. Yep.
That's because they
And that was
farms.
Only
Dropping.
11% of upper teens attended high school.
okay.
Even
And that
fewer
wasn't
graduated.
dropping out. It was just responsibilities at home.
Responsibilities, getting into the workplace. There are a lot more apprenticeship type things to do to get people into the trades, right? Very different approach that I think is going to be something we need to cover in some ways.
A lot more farms where they were needed at home.
That's true. Part of this also was the nature of farming, and even people who might have had a factory job probably had some type of subsistence farm too, to provide some food for their own families. So yeah, totally different
Families.
nature of what the home was. And that's what I'm trying to drive at with that first part, right? Whether it's education or industrialization, the whole nature of the way we organized our lives was different, okay? And that really is hard to think about because we've, in many cases, maybe not experienced it or trying to recover it in some ways. But that sense of going to work, which is assumed as so normal, right, is fairly new, historically speaking. It was something that happened much more naturally within the home setting, or going to the marketplace with what you produced at home, right, and those types of things. So definitely some creativity is required to keep the family unit central today. Yeah, Katie.
Do you think that the way the school system has been structured, it has affected how we end up defining ourselves through our work? Because it's so structured around schooling, so then you end up having that be your vocation rather than something you need to pick up that is just within your family, right? Because isn't that the definition of vocation is kind of messed up in that way, right?
Totally. It's sort of conflated with a career.
Yeah.
And schools do play a big role in that because when you take any type of moral formation or those types of things out of schooling, all you're left with is career. Mm-hmm. That's all you can tell kids, right? Well, you got to get your grades so you can get a good job. You got to go to college so you can get a good job. It's all career driven instead of vocationally driven, which are things that are much bigger than career and also outlast career.
Yes.
Right? Our roles as sons and daughters, as mothers and fathers, as brothers and sisters, as aunts and uncles, right? All of those things, as citizens, all of those things that outlast a career. Tim, you had your hand up?
Yeah, your comment interesting around industry and public schools contributing to the atomization of the family. It struck me though, probably parochial schools didn't, while better than public schools in many ways, didn't really address that particular issue. I've seen some schools trying to do that now by intentionally motivating more family orientation. I just wonder about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? So maybe somebody knows more on the history of Lutheran education than I do on that as far as what was done in parochial schools as far as incorporating the family. Maybe we can talk more about that between sessions. I don't have an answer off the top. Pastor, do you have something on that?
Well, I think part of it is that there was simply less time spent. Mm-hmm. They were less structured. There were less extracurriculars. I think after World War I and World War II, the Lutheran parochial schools began to mimic more and more the public schools, and as a more all-consuming kind of life. So, I think there's a lot less time. A lot of the Lutheran churches had the one-room schoolhouse with the pastor and maybe another teacher.
Right.
If it was a large church, you'd have something more, but it was not the all-consuming kind of thing. Right. Communal, familial.
Well,
It was often just the children of the church that were involved and not other children from the community. So I think that may have contributed to being a little more family-centric.
Yeah. What I've seen now is like some schools trying to address that by encouraging family participation, morning chapel, or family participation in the school itself. Right. set up new schools and things like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
That's where the Amish today still do that. Come from a community in Ohio that was very,
I think we can learn a lot from the Amish.
8th grade was all they went to, but they knew more than city kids.
Yep.
Well, I know my daughter has a preschool, lives in school in Arizona, and I know that she struggles with the fact that a lot of the kids that come, or the parents that bring their kids there, are kids who have been disruptive and haven't had a good home life, and they want to just put their kid in school that, well, maybe they'll be able to make them behave here, or maybe they'll be able to motivate them to learn here, or whatever, and then the parents just, go to work and leave them and don't.
Right.
I mean, she's got kids in preschool that haven't been potty trained, and they're expecting the teachers to teach them that. It's crazy
Right.
how parents have just,
School has become the second parent.
Yeah.
Primary parent.
Well,
Yeah.
I think the lesson is there's no drop-off model that can work. There's no assembly line model that we just sort of plop our kids on and then it just cranks them out the way we want them to. It's a lot messier than that. It takes a lot more family involvement. Yeah, that's the difference.
I wanted to say how much I appreciate the discussion of GODism because my entire life I've heard how great the public schools were in the 50s and 60s and how God was still a part of it and we should bring prayer back into schools and absolutely not, because that wouldn't be Christian. And it wasn't Christian, it never was.
I agree with that. I do. I think that's misguided to try to fight to get prayer or Bible reading back in schools because it's a generic GODism that, if anything, it sort of inoculates you from the real thing, I think. Now, granted, it might have some cultural value in some ways as far as putting something into the water as far as, a worldview that includes God. But if you watch schools today and how they deal with the Pledge of Allegiance, it'd be the same thing. I mean, none of them say the Pledge of Allegiance. They don't even have to stand up.
And it's the same concept with we're not a Christian country. We've never been a Christian country. We've been a deist country of sorts. But, and then to realize that and to be aware of that makes us focus more on this topic.
Yeah.
More
yeah.
intentionally.
So, right. Certainly the what philosophers call the social imaginary of the time definitely was influenced by Christianity, right, at the time of the founding. There were certainly Christian assumptions sort of in the water. But to go further than that and to make an argument for some type of specifically Christian nation or something, I think I'd agree with you there that that's a bit wrong-headed too. Yeah, John.
Yeah, I was just wondering, so what I was hearing is like some of the big drivers were the state trying to produce good citizens at one point, the factory trying to produce good factory workers. What about today? Would you say there's like a big driver in today's educational model?
Personally, what I saw and experienced, we were pretty much still stuck in the factory model. It's still, you got bells, you got classes. Most schools look like factories or jails. I think we've never really changed from that model because it's like moving it's like turning a big ship around, right? It takes forever. And the things are just ingrained so much that any attempts to change that basic system or structure just don't work. That's what I think of it.
Kind of caveat off that, like my kids were in Scouts. I'm pulling them from Scouts because it's the same thing with Godism of we're creating these good citizens and we have all these ideas, and now it's like, well, there's your duty to God, which is a requirement for each level, but it's whatever you kind of think, whatever your ideals are in your family. It's not anything to do with God anymore, but it's this pushing out of, well, we're creating these good citizens and this is what we're striving for. So there is a Christian group, Trails Leaders and American Heritage Girls, that are Christian-based trying to move forward with that. But I think that's a huge one that we're seeing is these Christian groups or these extracurricular groups trying to kind of create that same idea.
John?
Yeah, somewhat rhetorical, but I mean, how could it have gone any different? And then are you proposing, I think it's part two, but what is the proper response to it?
Well, I think it went different for groups that didn't participate, at least for a while. If you think about the groups that resisted public schooling. You have large portions of sort of Orthodox Judaism, the Amish, Catholicism, and also confessional Lutheranism that legally fought for the right to maintain education of their own people. A lot of legal battles to secure that right, and when the time when mandatory public schooling was becoming the law of the land. So I think there's some things we can certainly learn from those groups and what they did. I don't think there's any big solution. I think it's going to be more small, local, grassroots solutions. I mean, groups like this, right? We're learning from each other. We're building our community. We're building our relationships. We're going to need to continue to do that. I think there's many types of schooling options that are emerging. There's obviously parochial schools. There's hybrid schools where some is online, some is in person. There's obviously homeschool and homeschool co-ops. There's churches that are starting micro schools and one-room schoolhouses. So there's all of these littler options that I think give us a better chance of passing down what we want to. And that's a conclusion I've come to kicking and screaming. Because it, yeah. So anyway, any other questions? Yeah, Ed?
Have you explored I've heard it from, I think, parents talk a lot about the Yankee influence, or basically our current educational model has its roots in the Yankee model, in the northern New England educational model that's kind of replicated itself in the United States, and basically they pretty much won out. And as they diluted the faith that they have been trying to pass down to their children, that's the secularization that's kind of happened as a result.
I think that's a little bit oversimplified because the Yankee model would be different models depending what part of the Northeast you're in. For example, the Puritan communities really were the first to form common schools because they believed their kids needed to be trained to read the Bible. And they certainly indoctrinated their kids into Puritanism. So it wasn't a generic, model. It was community-based. These were community schools that were formed by local towns that were, the central thing of the town was the church, right? Town meetings were held in the church. In some cases, even in those towns, you had to be a member of the church to vote. And some of those things maybe get too far, but so there's things to be learned, I think, from the Puritan model of schooling. But if we're talking more of a maybe late 1700s, early 1800s, when we get to like Horace Mann, and the common school becoming more associated with the state, then maybe. In the South, in general, you did have a more local approach. You had a lot of private tutors during the colonial era, and so forth. But I don't think I'd be comfortable turning this into a North versus South thing. I think that's too simplistic.
I think more of the regional model, but not necessarily.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's move on. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to think because I work in a Christian school.
Yeah.
And we're always looking at this as negative. We have negative. What's going on? But it really has a positive effect on the Christian schools. I mean, they are busting at the seams where a few years ago they were closing because they couldn't pay the bills. Nobody was, paying to go. And now, people are like, what is going on in these public schools? We're getting out of there. We are going to start taking care of our family and what they believe and how they're going to be taught,
That's right. It creates an opportunity for sure to be leveraged. So you've seen an increase of attendance?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's great.
We have a waiting list, and not just our school, but many of the schools in our community, as well as, when I talk to other pastors who are at schools, they're having the same scenario. I mean, people are wanting something better than what they're offering in the public schools, because they're realizing that's not what we want our kids to know.
That's right.
We want to be out of here. And so, when years ago, it was like, oh my gosh, this school is closing over here. This, this has been in existence since I was born, and it's so sad to see this one closing, all of the, the Lutheran high schools, up north. And now they're like, we need to start something because, it's just not a good place out there in your public schools.
Right. Yeah, the last few years I think have caused a lot of people to rethink the way they organize family, home, and school. And that can be a great blessing for us to tap into and to leverage what we've got and build what we have as well. Yeah, thank you. That's good. Okay, so I'm just going to hit a few points from part 2 and then move to part 3. Part 2, connecting the dots, what I was doing there is just providing some family stats on isolation and loneliness. I'll just throw a couple out there. For example, Washington, D.C., 45% of households in Washington, D.C. are occupied by a single person. Millennials leading this trend, roughly 6 in 10 live alone. So we very much are seeing the fruits of autonomy on display in the living arrangements of many Americans. If we think about autonomy as well, it's a central concept in the abortion debate, bodily autonomy. In the LGBT issues, gender autonomy is an important term. And even in the political realm, citizen autonomy is assumed. That we have the choice, right, to make choices about politicians and so forth through voting and whatnot. And then also autonomy comes very naturally online as well. Because you're in control, right? You're constantly, clicking, swiping, tapping, and the computer's obeying your will, right? The screen obeys your command. But that also forms us. Okay, so let's go on to part 3 then. Living the truth. First, I want to critique some of these ideas from the inside, and then we'll get into some possible alternatives and things to think about. First off, absolute autonomy breaks down. It actually enslaves one to the self. And you also miss out on the reassurance of limits. There's actually empowerment in submission. So if we think about how we learn music, or learn a language, or learn any new skill, you submit to the rules of that domain. Then you become good at it, and you're free to excel at it, right? Ed was jamming away last night on the guitar and the mandolin. But to do that, he had to submit himself to practice, to time signatures, to reading music, to building up calluses on his fingertips, right? He had to submit himself to the discipline of music to then be able to be free to play music well and to make us all smile, right? That's what submission does. When you submit to something, you're actually empowered to flourish within it, right? And that applies to how we learn language, music, sports, any skill, right? That's just the way it works. So absolute autonomy really just doesn't even line up to the way our natural human life works. And similarly then, that applies to the family. The family structure is the same. Life within the family structure fosters human flourishing and freedom in ways that autonomy cannot. Now, family life isn't freeing in the sense of completely untethering us from responsibility and commitment, but it does free us from vulnerability and loneliness and isolation, and instead provides us with the original community in which we find meaningful identity and can make meaningful contributions. And everyone plays a role in this. Young children, adult children, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, siblings, all have a central role to play in God's design for the natural family. And I prefer the term natural family over the nuclear family. Because the nuclear family really emerges in the 50s as people are living in more isolated arrangements, mother, father, children, right? The natural family encompasses more than that, okay? And again, it's an older model of how we view the family. That's something Alan Carlson writes about in a lot of his books about the family. He's a great LCMS writer and author. He talks a lot about using the term natural family, okay? Certainly the center part of that family, natural family, is mother, father, children, right? But that's in a web of a larger network of kin, right? That we could call the natural family, that everybody contributes to and participates in. Absolute autonomy, to another point here, doesn't actually line up with reality. We all have portions of our lives where we are radically dependent. And those times bring us outside ourselves into a deeper experience of love and each other. in a moving account of his experience of terminal cancer before he even reached 40 years old. Paul Kalanithi wrote in When Breath Becomes Air of how he and his wife wondered if having children before he died from cancer would make death harder for them and their potential children. But they arrived at this striking conclusion. Wouldn't it be great if it did? Kalanithi and his wife saw that only within the context of sacrifice, suffering, and confronting our human limitations can we grow and more fully experience the love of another, despite or perhaps because of our weaknesses. We are radically dependent creatures, not autonomous agents. The great farmer poet Wendell Berry puts it this way, quote, "No one can be whole alone. No one can be free alone. To be whole and to be free is to be at home, in a place and in a community where one knows and is known." For several years now, demographers, sociologists, and cultural commentators have shown keen interest in what familial trends in modern society may mean for the future. Top-heavy population pyramids and sexual revolution ethics have created a world order previously unimagined. And we're starting to see the inherent challenges for individualist societies that prize autonomy so highly, and the fragility of systems and global supply chains that function on individualist presuppositions and autonomous consumerism with little connection to place or community. Mary Eberstadt suggested as much back in 2013. Quote, "One need not imagine a full-scale crisis to see how the pressures of a shrinking and aging Western population might force a new reconsideration of the family." Perhaps these things might come to pass, perhaps they may not, but either way, we can practice a wonderful alternative found in the natural family. Not because of some existential threat, but because it is good. Stable yet beautiful. Ordinary yet miraculous. Mundane yet enchanting. Unified home living and economic and educational productivity were quite familiar to generations past when life orbited more naturally around family and local community. In that environment, lessons in self-sufficiency, household thrift, and the efficient production of goods flowed quite naturally from hearth and home. Work was more a natural part of life, on your property, in your home, on your farm, in your bakery in town, with your living quarters above it. The family was seen as the productive unit of society, engaged in economic activity that involved mothers, fathers, and children in homes and in the marketplace. As challenges inherent in our modern economic arrangements come more fully into view, a simple family-centered household economy with everyone contributing is not stale but smart, is not limiting but liberating. Now, this is not a nostalgic longing for some past era, nor I'm saying we should all quit our jobs and go to the forest. I'm not romanticizing about trendy, chic homesteading, but we certainly can do things to shift the balance of formation back towards home and family. Whether you live in a city, a suburb, a town, a house, an apartment, or the countryside, your home already is a home economy, whether you think of it that way or not. Whether we've devoted efforts to making it such or not. Whether we're a one-person household or many. Whether our kids are out of the home or we still hear their little feet. Whether our children live with us or whether we live alone. The question is how to make our home economy stronger and more fruitful so that it reinforces a unified, holistic view of life. To help with that, it's good to think about the home economy as a two-sided coin. On one side of the coin, the home can be a place of revenue-generating production for the marketplace, which it was in the pre-industrial world. Probably not as common today, right? But the other side of the coin is the role that the home has always had as a place of cost-reducing economic production for itself, as each family member adds value to the household through skills, trades, hobbies, and the like. This cost-reducing, yet value-adding side of the coin especially comes through in the Greek word economy itself, which comes from oikos and nomos. Pastors, what do those two words mean? Oikos. Household. Family, right? Nomos. Law. Right? So economy, the very word that we associate with cash, GDP, interest rates, right? Global issues with banking and so forth, actually originally is referring to the household. Okay? A place of productivity, creativity, and fruitfulness. Thinking about these questions certainly is hard and challenging, and there's no easy answers or options to pursue. But no matter your profession or work schedule, we can build families that are productive, resilient, and together. I think those are three key things. To be productive as a family, to be together as a family, and to build resiliency as a family. And I think we can do this in many ways. A few possible ways that are fun and financially productive involve what used to be called the household arts. Plenty of lessons can be learned right in the kitchen. We eat every day. We have to eat to live. But we can do more than just eat. We can learn things together by preparing food, by growing food, by passing down family recipes, right? This can start very small and grow into something very complex, right? It can start with tomatoes on the back porch to, tilling up your whole yard. It can start from learning how to hard-boil eggs to making an Eggs Benedict, right? But all those things help build skills of resiliency, build confidence, right? Lifelong skills that also have a financial benefit for the home and saving money. The home, I think this is very key, should not be viewed as a place of consumption, but a place of productivity, fruitfulness, as a place to develop competence, maintenance, and so forth. We must break free from consumerism. So much of modern politics and culture simply wants to make us consumers. Break it. Throw sand in its gears. Learn to repair something. Make something yourself. Develop skills of resilient living. Ask a skilled neighbor, coworker, or church member to teach you something. Find a local handmade version of something that you're wanting to buy. Making and maintaining things taps into elemental desires embedded in the human experience that in some shadowed sense mimic the Creator. Cooking and creating, building and preserving are residues of some primal urge to reverse the chaos in our present world and restore things to the proper order found in Eden. Even before the fall, there was also work to be done. The home is the original environment for those things. A place where physical and mental activity, where work and rest all meet, just like they did in the garden. Before the creation of the government and even the church, God brought to man a woman and formed a family. Luther writes, quote, "The whole divinity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, all unitedly say to Adam, Behold, this is thy bride, with whom thou art to dwell, and with whom thou art to generate and bring up children." Luther asks, is it not worthy of admiration that God instituted and ordained marriage even in the state of innocence? Even in pre-fall Eden, the family unit was embedded to the cosmic order, tying us together in relationships of self-giving love. And even after the fall, Luther suggests that, quote, "This living together as male and female, man and wife, in the state of matrimony, they're keeping house together, they're being blessed together with offspring, they're bringing up their children, is a faint picture and remnant of that blessed original married life." In his 1529 Order of Marriage for Common Pastors, Luther says, "This is your comfort, that you may know and believe that your estate is pleasing to God and blessed by Him." We can recover something of this robust vision of the family's creative, fruitful power. What this looks like for each family will be different. And again, I'm not glamorizing the past or glamorizing rural America or romanticizing going back to the land. There's trade-offs with any era and any economic arrangement. I'm not trying to turn back the clock, right? Each way of living brings its own set of challenges. But we've gone so far in one direction that we do need to reclaim some of these aspects of fruitfulness and working together as families, things that used to come more naturally. And I look around the room, and certainly there's a lot of that in here. We have farmers and foresters. We have people that know a thing or two about fixing cars and navigating financial markets, brewing beer and sewing clothes, engineering complex systems, and rolling out a mean pie crust. Strong families that have been forged around catechesis and prayer, spending time together, forming traditions. We can share these skills with each other and assist one another in embodied living on a humane scale. We want to strengthen family life and homes, not because of some apocalyptic event that may or may not be coming, not because some political party is in power, not because of some conspiracy theory, not because we are preppers, but because we are people. Here we need to be careful not to be driven by fear or anxiety or predictions of the future that may or may not be true. What drives us is not fear, but rather what is good, true, beautiful, and human. This means we don't hoard, we share. We prepare, yes, but in order to give. The purpose is to serve God and neighbor, not to stock up on more sacrifices at the altar of mammon. Each additional small act, practice, and choice we make to shift the balance of human formation back to where it rightly belongs is worth it. There are 1,000 small decisions that can lead towards treasuring this original community of family. Food from your own garden, a home repair completed by you and your children, taking ownership of your children's education, no matter what form that takes, a freshly baked loaf of bread, catechizing your own children, incorporating daily devotions, reviving old family traditions and forging new ones. The more we live life outside the machine, the better. Such habits forged in the crucible of the family prepare the way for meaningful service in community, based on the same values and choices made first in the household. No matter our stage in life, the home can be a place of creation and generation, contemplation and sanctification. Whether you live alone or with others, your home can be a place of productivity and life, a place of catechesis and prayer, a place of hospitality and welcome. All this requires intentionality. It doesn't just happen. It takes work. I think also we do need to be careful not to glamorize those who are in the stage of life with lots of young children, as if they are more spiritual than others. Certainly children are wonderful. The blessings of marital life and the gift of children is wonderful and should be celebrated and done so loudly in a culture that does not value those things and delays marriage and delays children, right? But I think also we need to make sure that the way we present and talk about these things, that it's clear that everyone, no matter their family situation, is a full participant in the family of God. Right? Whether we're single, whether we're married with tons of kids, whether we're barren, whether we're divorced, whether we're widowed or widower, right? Everyone is in the family of God. So how do we do that? That's the hard part. Right? The church is a place for all. Everyone has a role. Think of the beauty of the elderly worshiping Christ, who despite a life of ups and downs, pain and suffering, have been preserved in the faith. Their years of wisdom and experience are worth more than gold. And they're also closer to the art of dying well than children, young adults, and middle-aged. How can we learn from them? they also have an opportunity, along with those who are single and those who are widows, to pour into their church family in a way that those who have children don't have the time to do. The church also has an opportunity to serve the elderly in unique ways as health declines and more care is needed. The only time a homebound member sees their church family shouldn't be on a screen when they watch the worship service. They should see us too. We should go and sing them Christmas carols. They should go along with the pastor on a visit. The only time the homebound member sees a church member should not be the pastor, only the pastor, and should not be on a screen. How do we do that, right? How do we facilitate a more robust way of serving all the family of God, right? And singles, I think, is a group that especially we need to think about, okay? They are also full participants. John Kleining's recent book, Wonderfully Made, has a wonderful section on singles and singlehood. I'm just going to quote a few parts of that. Some things to think about that I think are pretty interesting. One, he says this: singleness serves its own God-given purpose and has its own beauty, even though its importance receives far too little attention in the church. Singlehood is a primary mode of human life in the body that even those who marry share before they marry and still share when they are married. Everyone experiences singlehood, and such original solitude is an essential part of our humanity. So there's some things he says about singlehood. I don't think we think about that. That even as married people, we participate in singlehood before we're married, if our spouse dies, and in a way, even while we're married. Now, certainly, he also points out that one of the biggest challenges in our society is how our obsession with sex and sexual identity, which we talked about yesterday, darkens and distorts all of our relationships, which really affects friendship. Okay? Male-to-male friendship, female-to-female friendship, male-to-female friendship. All of those things are very hard to facilitate because we have a sexualized view of the self, where any deep male-to-male friendship has like some weird connotation of sex, right? So that creates a really difficult dynamic to build meaningful friendships within the church. He says this: our obsession with sex and sexual identity darkens and distorts all our relationships and moves friendships from being a gift to be something regarded with suspicion or latently erotic. When all relationships are sexualized, friendships are greatly diminished and often undone. The church, then, should be a safe place, sexually, that contributes much to the recovery and promotion of friendships for single people. The church, we live our covenant life together. This is our eternal family. I think some of his points are really, really good to think about there in relation to singleness. I think also, again, the doctrine of vocation is helpful. We've already mentioned this, that the doctrine of vocation expands to include all of life, multiple roles within life, beyond getting married and having kids, certainly beyond a career. And again, in a society where marriage and family is downplayed so much, we need to scream that loud and clear and celebrate it and find ways to help our young people meet good possible spouses so they can form marriages and form families, right? All those things are very important. It's one of the greatest callings in life. But it too has a telos. It too has a destiny. And as we see in Ephesians 5, Christ and the church don't get their inspiration from human marriage. It's the other way around. The perfect image is Christ and the church. Human marriage reflects that ultimate marriage of humanity and God. So the mother and father's ultimate identity is not found in being a mother or father, as great and wonderful as that is. It's ultimately being in Christ and being His bride. Right? There's no marriage in heaven. So again, wonderful gift. Don't get me wrong. But if we put all of our identity in being a mother or father, what happens when I find out I didn't do a very good job at that? What happens if I realize I never can have kids? Right? So I think it does need to be situated in the bigger picture of the telos, of the destiny of marriage to Christ. It's in this realm of family and also the accompanying sexual ethics that Christianity will look most countercultural, weird, and intriguing today. This is one of the most revolutionary aspects of early Christianity, too. In Sarah Rudin's book, Paul Among the People, he explains that Paul's teaching on sexuality was liberating and freeing in the pornographic Greco-Roman world. Paul taught a completely countercultural concept that husband and wife were to value the body of the other, with mutual conjugal rights over each other's body. This channeled male eros into monogamy and self-giving agape. It also elevated slaves and women beyond objects of pleasure for the wealthy. It filled marriage with love. A Christian understanding of the human person and of family imbues sex with richer meaning, one that remade ancient civilization. As Rod Dreher summarizes, quote, "In Christianity, what people do with their sexuality cannot be separated from what the human person is." In our day, when autonomy, transience, and instability are the norm, Christianity offers givenness and rootedness. We are planted in webs of mutual interdependence that are given. At our birth, our name is given. Our place is given. Our family is given. Our community is given. Many of the most basic categories of self-understanding, things like bodies, families, churches, communities, nations, and more, are granted to us. That is, if we're willing to dethrone the autonomous self, who only sees self-chosen commitments as authentic. We can be rooted, settled selves by receiving the gifts of our identity. There are enough unknowns in the universe. We don't need to upend the most fundamental and primal forms of human identity by turning them into additional questions of self-discovery. Instead, we can reorient around our given identities that plant us deep in families, communities, and churches. We have been planted in a garden. Though it's a garden with thorns and thistles, suffering and evil, it still reverberates with echoes of that primordial garden and the Edenic declaration of it is very good. It is in this corrupted yet still hopeful garden of the world that we experience hints of our true human telos. And it is in the garden of the family and of the church that those glimpses of our final destiny are popping up through the soil in the gifts of God in word and sacrament, which plant us deep in union with Christ and with each other. And greater still, on the garden's horizon, we see a shadow of the final eschaton, where we will be planted in the restored garden of God, and will find fullest expression of human identity imaginable, being planted deeply, even grafted together with the true vine, in full communion with the Holy Trinity and with one another. Amen. All right, time for questions. Questions, critiques, concerns?
I noted on some of your readings, this Front Porch Republic. Is that a book?
It's an online magazine.
Oh, it's okay.
Yep, so all those articles that are listed under each heading, those are available online. So if you want to read some more about those topics, if you type in that title, it'll come up.
Okay.
Yep.
I noticed in several places on your...
Yes, ma'am.
Part 3, subheading 2B, what were the 3 states?
Okay, great, thank you, yes. So if we go to the charts there, I've got some things about the 3 estates. Thank you.
Sorry.
We'll talk. No, it's good. We'll talk about the graphic organizers there. I've got sort of a comparison of what contemporary happy life is described as versus a Christian response. Sort of a digital view of life versus a Christian response, and then some things about the 3 estates. So the three estates, Luther talks about these variously. The household, the state, and the church. And I have there the Latin words for those, which really come straight from the Greek. Oikonomia, politia, and ecclesia. I think the most interesting one, looking at the original word, is the household one. The family, the home economy. So these are the three orders, the three estates, the three stations. Luther calls them variously throughout his writings. I'll just quote the quote in the box there. First, the Bible speaks and teaches about the works of God. About this there is no doubt. These works are divided into three hierarchies: the household, the government, and the church. Right? So all of society can be sort of placed into those three estates, orders, or hierarchies. There's some other quotes from Luther there describing those things. I put in parentheses frameworks for flourishing. That's certainly not a Luther phrase, but I think it's a helpful way to think about what they do for us. Okay, they're not structures that limit us. They actually help us flourish. Right? They're frameworks for flourishing as human beings. Other questions? Tim?
Okay, just one question. You said culture wants us to exist as consumers rather than producers. You're referring essentially to the family, right?
The family unit, maybe fruitful would be a better word than producers, because producers could be related to the workplace too. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. I mean, I might just accentuate that. I agree with you 100%. But I think they want individuals to be producers, but preferably as part of like large publicly held corporations specializing in
where you're a cog in the machine.
Right. Yeah. And they probably prefer families not to exist at all. But if they exist, they only exist as consumers, right? And
Right.
I appreciate your thought.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's a good clarification, right? By producer, we're not referring to sort of the workplace, assembly line model, whether that's in the corporate office or the factory or some, different industry. We're referring to fruitfulness as a family. That the closer we can be to that direct production, the better. Good. Good clarification.
That quote from Henry Ford about it's so bad that he has to hire the whole person instead of just his hands.
Yeah, right.
Because he has the part that does the work and cares about the rest of the body.
Right. Yeah, that's good. Any other questions, comments, concerns, critiques? Yes, John?
I was just curious if you could maybe unpack a little bit. What I'm hearing with the autonomy is, it's kind of an illusion in the sense that we are dependent, and maybe we need to look through. Maybe we become too dependent on the state, we become too big, and we're trying to figure out where they sort of gotten out of their bounds, and now, the things of the church or the things of the family should be doing, we need to kind of like reorder things. But can you talk a little bit about personal autonomy in the sense that I'm a moral agent and I have individual responsibility to make moral choices? Is there sort of a distinction there?
I prefer the term agency, which you just sort of use moral agent. I think human agency is something we need to express. I prefer that word because autonomy, I think, has all that baggage of self-law, right? That's what autonomos means. So agency is our expression as human beings that we are responsible to make moral decisions. And that through that expression, we also sort of build confidence, and it sort of reinforces itself as we express agency in the world. Whether it's something as simple as learning to ride a bike as a kid, right? Which then gives the child more agency to do new things and build confidence to do new things. So I like agency as a word there. Yeah, that's good. Anything else? All right, thank you so much for your attention and great questions.